The moment Elena Hale's father shook hands with the Apache warrior, she knew her life had just been bartered away like cattle. But what terrified her more than being sold wasn't the scarred man with amber eyes who now owned her. It was the cold relief in her father's face as he pocketed the coins and rode away without looking back. She thought she understood cruelty. She thought she knew what men were capable of. She was wrong. What waited for her in the desert wasn't what she expected, and neither was the man who took her there. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The trading post sat like a broken tooth against the New Mexico horizon, all weathered wood and desperate hope. It was the kind of place where fortunes died quietly and men traded their last shreds of dignity for one more day of survival. The morning sun hadn't yet burned away the chill when Marcus Hale rode in with his daughter seated behind him, her hands gripping his coat with the white-knuckled certainty of someone who already knew something bad was coming. Elena had stopped asking questions 2 days ago. Her father's silence had grown teeth. Inside, the post smelled like tobacco, old leather, and the particular sourness of men who'd given up bathing. 3 traders hunched over a barrel playing cards with coins they'd probably stolen. A Mexican woman sold dried meat from a corner, her eyes tracking every movement like a hawk waiting for scraps. And standing near this back, speaking low with the post's owner, was a man who didn't belong to this world of bent backs and broken dreams. Taza Roran. Even Elena, who'd spent most of her 19 years sheltered on a failing homestead, had heard the name whispered with the kind of fear usually reserved for rabid dogs and federal marshals. Apache warrior. Survivor of wars that had turned the territory into a graveyard. He stood with the stillness of someone who'd learned that movement attracted bullets. His dark hair shot through with premature silver, a scar running from his left temple to his jaw like someone had tried to peel his face off and he'd simply refused to die. His eyes were amber, sharp. They missed nothing. "Stay here," her father muttered, dismounting. Elena didn't move. She watched Marcus approach the 2 men with his hat in his hands, shoulders curved in the posture of begging. She couldn't hear the words, but she could read the shape of the conversation in her father's gestures. Pleading, desperate. The post owner shook his head. Marcus kept talking. The Apache, Taza, listened without expression, arms crossed over a chest wrapped in worn cotton and old scars. Then those amber eyes found her. Elena's breath caught. It wasn't desire in that gaze. It wasn't hunger or cruelty or any of the things she'd been warned men looked at women with. It was assessment, clinical, the way you'd examine a horse you weren't sure could make the journey. Her father turned, gestured toward her. No. She slid off the horse before she realized she was moving, boots hitting dust. Pa? Marcus wouldn't meet her eyes. Elena, come here. What's happening? Just come here. The space between them felt like miles. She crossed it anyway because she'd been raised to obey, raised to keep quiet, raised to be the kind of daughter who didn't cause problems. When she reached her father's side, she could smell the whiskey on him. 3 days of riding, and he'd found time to drink. "This is my daughter," Marcus said to Taza, his voice carrying the false brightness of a snake oil salesman. "Elena, she's strong, good cook, keeps a clean house, doesn't complain." The words hit her like fists. "Pa, what are you—" "Quiet!" Marcus's hand shot out, gripping her arm hard enough to bruise. "The men are talking." Taza's gaze shifted from Elena to Marcus, and something cold moved through those amber eyes. "Let her go." It wasn't a request. Marcus released her arm like it had burned him. "You came to me about land," the post owner said, nervous energy making his hands flutter. "Water rights, grazing access. I told you, Hale, I don't have the authority to— I heard you had access to those who do." Marcus cut in, desperate. "I heard you could make introductions. Smooth things over with the Apache who control the water sources." "That's not how this works." "I can pay." Marcus's voice cracked. "I have assets. Livestock, tools. I have—" He gestured again at Elena, and the world tilted sideways. She stared at her father, at this man who'd taught her to ride, who'd told her stories by firelight when she was small, who'd promised her mother on her deathbed that he'd take care of their daughter. "You're joking," Elena whispered. Marcus wouldn't look at her. It's business. I'm your daughter. You're 19 years old and unmarried. What kind of future do you think you have? The homestead is failing. We're 3 months from starvation. This way, he swallowed hard. This way you'll be taken care of. By selling me? Her voice rose, cracking. Like a mule? It's not selling, it's an arrangement, a trade. He gets help on his land, you get security, I get access to water rights, and you get to save yourself. The words came out flat, dead. That's what this is. The post owner shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we should discuss this outside. There's nothing to discuss, Marcus snapped. Do we have a deal or not? For the first time, Taza spoke directly to Marcus. What makes you think I want her? The question should have been insulting. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing anyone had said all morning. Marcus fumbled for words. She's young, healthy, she can work, she's pretty enough. You live alone out there, everyone knows that. A man needs many things. Taza's voice was quiet, but it cut through Marcus's babbling like a blade. Assuming you know what they are makes you a fool. Silence dropped over the trading post like a burial shroud. Marcus's face flushed red. I'm offering you a fair trade. You're offering me a human being like she's a bag of grain. Taza's eyes moved to Elena again, and she saw something flicker in them. Recognition, maybe, or memory. Why should I take her? Because, Marcus gestured wildly, because it's a good deal. Because you need someone to keep your house, I keep my own house. Then for companionship, Marcus was unraveling, desperation leaking through every word. Please, I need those water rights. My land is dying. Everything is dying. I just need access to the springs on the eastern ridge, and I can save the homestead. I can make something of it again. You need to save yourself, Taza said softly. Even if it costs her everything. Marcus flinched. It's not like that. Then what is it like? No answer. Because there was no good answer. No words that could make this transaction anything other than what it was. A father trading his daughter's life for water, and one more chance at a dream that had already died. Elena felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart. Something deeper. The place where she'd kept her faith in people, in family, in the idea that she mattered as more than collateral. I'll go, she heard herself say. 3 pairs of eyes snapped to her. Elena, Marcus started. I said, I'll go. She looked at Taza, forcing herself to meet those unsettling amber eyes. If it means I never have to see him again, I'll go. Taza studied her for a long moment. Then, quietly, You don't know what you're agreeing to. And you don't know what I'm escaping from. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite surprise. More like recognition, the kind that comes when you see your own ghost standing in front of you. He turned to the post owner. You have paper? Ink? Wait. Marcus stepped forward. We need to discuss terms. Payment. I need guarantees about the water access. You'll get your access. Taza's tone carried the finality of a closing door. In exchange, you'll sign over all legal claim to her. No contact, no visits, no letters. She becomes free of you entirely. That's not, I'm her father, I have rights. You gave up your rights when you brought her here to sell. Taza's voice dropped to something dangerous. Take the deal or leave. But if you leave with her, and you'll never see water from those springs. The post owner hurried to produce paper, clearly wanting this transaction over with. Elena watched her father's face cycle through expressions. Anger, shame, calculation. Always calculation. He was weighing the cost of his daughter against the value of water. Water won. Fine, Marcus said hoarsely. Draw up the papers. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of scratching pens and legal language Elena barely understood. The post owner served as witness. Marcus signed his name with shaking hands, his signature a scrawl of desperation. When it was done, he stood there holding the signed agreement guaranteeing him water access, his ticket to salvation purchased with his daughter's freedom. Elena, he said, and his voice almost broke. I don't. She couldn't look at him. If she looked at him, she might forgive him. And she couldn't afford forgiveness. Forgiveness was for people who had the luxury of hope. Just go. You'll understand someday. When you're older, when you have your own children to protect, I'll what? Sell them? Now she did look at him, and the expression on her face made him step back. I'll become like you? That's what you think parenthood is? Using the people who trust you most? The world isn't kind, Elena. It doesn't care about our feelings. It only cares about who survives. Then I guess we'll see if you survive. She turned away from him. Without me. She heard him leave, heard his boots on the wooden floor, the creak of the door, the sound of his horse being mounted. She didn't turn around. She stood very still, feeling the weight of every eye in the trading post on her back, and tried to figure out how to breathe around the anvil sitting on her chest. A hand appeared in her peripheral vision, brown skin marked with old scars, calluses built from years of hard work, empty, offering nothing except itself. We should go, Taza said quietly. Elena stared at that hand. She could refuse, could run, could throw herself on the mercy of the post owner or the Mexican woman or anyone except the Apache warrior who now owned her like property. But run where? Back to a father who'd sold her? Forward into a desert she didn't know? She took his hand. His grip was firm, but not crushing. He helped her to her feet with the impersonal courtesy you'd show a stranger who'd stumbled. Then he released her and moved toward the door, clearly expecting her to follow. She did, because she had no other choice. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, turning the sky into a bright hostile blue. Taza's horse stood waiting, a large dappled gray mare with intelligent eyes and scars on her flanks that spoke of battles survived. He swung into the saddle with practiced ease, then extended his hand down to Elena. You know how to ride? Yes. Then you ride behind me. Hold on to my coat, not me. Understand? She understood. He was drawing boundaries, making rules, establishing that even though he'd bought her, he wouldn't touch her without permission. It should have been reassuring. Instead, it just made the whole situation more surreal. Elena gripped his coat and pulled herself up behind him. The horse shifted under the new weight, but didn't protest. Taza clicked his tongue, and they moved forward, away from the trading post, away from civilization, away from everything Elena had ever known. They rode in silence. The landscape shifted around them, scrub brush giving way to red rock formations, the air growing drier and hotter as they climbed into the high desert. Elena had lived her entire life in New Mexico. But this was a different New Mexico, wilder, older, the kind of place where human concerns seemed laughably small against the scope of geology and time. After 2 hours, Taza stopped at a narrow creek to water the horse. You can get down, he said. Stretch your legs. Elena dismounted clumsily, her muscles already protesting the unfamiliar position. She stood uncertain while Taza let the mare drink, his attention on the surrounding terrain with the constant vigilance of someone who'd survived by never relaxing. Where are we going? She finally asked. My land, northeast from here, another day's ride. And when we get there? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Elena felt pinned by that amber gaze. When we get there, you'll have a choice. I don't think I have choices anymore. Everyone has choices. He turned back to the horse. The question is whether you're brave enough to make them. Before she could respond, he stiffened. His hand dropped to the knife at his belt with the speed of long practice, his entire body shifting into a defensive posture. What? Elena started. Quiet. She heard it then. Hoofbeats. Multiple riders, moving fast. Taza's jaw tightened. Get behind that rock formation. Now. What's happening? Now, Elena. The use of her name, the first time he'd said it, shocked her into movement. She scrambled behind the red rocks as 3 riders burst into view, their horses lathered with sweat. They saw Taza and pulled up hard, hands moving toward weapons. Well, well, the lead rider said. He was white, middle-aged, with the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile. A tin star glinted on his vest. Sheriff. Taza roarin', been a while. Sheriff Garrett. Taza's voice was neutral, careful. Didn't expect to see you this far east. Following up on a report. Seems there was some kind of transaction at the trading post this morning. A man named Marcus Hale claimed you took his daughter. Elena's stomach dropped. I didn't take anyone. Taza's hand stayed near his knife. There was a legal exchange, witnessed and signed. Legal. Garrett smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That's a funny word to use for buying a white woman. I didn't buy her. Her father signed over his parental claim in exchange for water access. The post owner witnessed it. And where's this woman now? Silence stretched tight as a bowstring. Elena stepped out from behind the rocks. All three riders' hands dropped to their guns. Taza shifted slightly, putting himself between Elena and the sheriff, a movement so subtle she almost missed it. Miss Hale, Garrett said, his eyes sweeping over her like he was cataloging evidence. Are you here of your own free will? The question was a trap. Elena could feel it. If she said no, Taza would likely be arrested or killed where he stood. If she said yes, she'd be confirming a transaction that clearly made the sheriff's skin crawl. Either way, someone would suffer. My father made an agreement, she said carefully. I'm honoring it. That's not what I asked. Did this man force you to come with him? Elena looked at Taza. His expression was unreadable, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his weight had shifted to the balls of his feet. Ready to fight, ready to die, if that's what it came to. She thought about her father's face as he'd signed the papers, the relief in his eyes as he'd chosen water over his daughter. No one forced me, she said. I chose to leave. Garrett's eyes narrowed. Your father tells a different story, says you were coerced, says this Apache threatened you. My father, Elena said, and her voice came out harder than she intended, is a liar trying to save his own reputation. He traded me for water rights, realized how that made him look, and now he's rewriting history. I'm not a child. I made a choice. One of the other riders spat into the dirt. White woman choosing to go with an Apache. That ain't natural. What ain't natural, Elena shot back, is a father selling his daughter like livestock. But I notice you're not riding after him. Garrett studied her for a long moment. Miss Hale, if you're in danger, if you've been threatened into saying these things, I haven't been threatened. She was shaking now, but she kept her voice steady. I've been given more respect in the last 3 hours than I got in 19 years under my father's roof. So unless you're planning to arrest me for making choices you don't approve of, I suggest you let us pass. The sheriff's jaw worked. He was clearly weighing his options: enforce some vague moral standard against a legal transaction, or let an Apache warrior ride off with a white woman and face the whispers that would follow. Politics versus law. Racism versus paperwork. Finally, he nodded. You got those papers? The ones from the trading post? Taza produced them without a word. Garrett read them over, his face darkening with every line. When he finished, he thrust them back with clear disgust. Legally, this appears to be an order, he said, the words tasting like poison. But if I hear any reports of mistreatment, any evidence that Miss Hale has been harmed or held against her will, I'll come back, and I won't be alone. Understand? Understood, Taza said evenly. Garrett looked at Elena one more time. You change your mind. There's a sheriff's office in Alamogordo. You get yourself there. We'll help you. Don't matter what papers say. You're still a free woman under the law. I know what I am, Elena said. The riders left, kicking up dust as they departed. Elena watched them go, her heart hammering against her ribs. When they were out of sight, she turned to find Taza watching her. You could have told them the truth, he said quietly. You could have ended this. That was the truth. She hugged herself against a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. My father sold me. You gave me a choice to refuse. That makes you better than him, whether you meant to be or not. Taza was quiet for a long moment. Then, we should keep moving. It's not safe to stay in one place too long. They rode on. The sun climbed toward its apex, turning the desert into a furnace. Elena's throat grew dry, her lips cracking despite the water Taza offered from his canteen. She'd expected him to push hard, to put distance between them and the sheriff. Instead, he maintained a steady pace, stopping periodically to check their surroundings, once to let the horse rest in the shade of a rocky overhang. You don't act like a man who just bought a slave, Elena said during one of these stops. Taza was checking the mare's hooves. He didn't look up. That's because I didn't buy a slave. Then what did you buy? A complication. He set the hoof down gently, and maybe a chance to stop a bad thing from becoming worse. What does that mean? He straightened, wiping dust from his hands. Your father was drunk, desperate. When men like him get desperate, they make bad deals with worse people. If I hadn't taken you, someone else would have. Someone who wouldn't have cared what you wanted. The words settled over her like a blanket. So you saved me. I delayed your suffering. There's a difference. He moved to remount. Come on, we're losing daylight. By the time the sun started its descent toward the horizon, Elena's entire body ached. She'd ridden horses before, but never like this. Hours of constant movement over rough terrain. Her hands were raw from gripping Taza's coat. Her legs trembled every time they stopped. She didn't complain. Complaining wouldn't change anything. It would just prove that she was weak, helpless, exactly what men like the sheriff expected her to be. As dusk painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, they crested a rise, and Elena saw it. A homestead carved into the red hills like a secret. Not large, a small house built from adobe and salvaged wood, a corral, a storage shed, a vegetable garden fighting for survival against the harsh climate, but maintained, cared for. Every plank straight, every fence post secure. The work of someone who'd built something with his own hands and refused to let it fall apart. This is yours? She asked. It's mine. They descended toward the house, and as they drew closer, Elena could see more details. A water pump near the garden, chicken wire stretched over a small coop, tools hung neatly inside the shed. Everything organized with military precision. Taza helped her dismount, then led the mare to the corral. Elena stood in the yard, uncertain, while he went through the routine of unsaddling and brushing down his horse. The animal clearly trusted him, leaning into his touch as he worked. When he finished, he approached Elena with that same careful distance he'd maintained all day. There's a room in the back of the house, he said. It has a bed, a trunk for belongings, a window that locks from the inside. That's your space. I won't enter it without permission. Elena blinked. What? The rest of the house. We'll share. Kitchen, common area. There's a bathing room. You'll have privacy when you need it. I hunt most of my food, grow what I can. You can eat what I provide or cook for yourself. Your choice. I don't understand. What do you want from me? Taza looked at her, and for the first time she saw something like exhaustion in those amber eyes. I want you to survive, that's all. I want you to figure out who you are when you're not being sold or threatened or controlled. I want... He stopped, started again. I watch too many people lose themselves because someone else decided their worth. I won't be that person. Not for you, not for anyone. But the papers, my father, you paid for... I paid for your father to leave you alone. He gestured toward the house. Everything else is up to you. You want to work? Work. You want to rest? Rest. You want to leave? There's Alamogordo 2 days west, Roswell 3 days north. But if you stay as yourself. Not as property. Understand? Elena stared at him. At this scarred Apache warrior who'd bought her freedom by purchasing her bondage, who lived alone in the desert like a ghost, but kept his home with the pride of a king. Why? The question came out as a whisper. Why would you do this? Taza was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old wounds. Because someone should have done it for my sister, and no one did. He turned and walked toward the house, leaving Elena standing in the yard as stars began to pierce the darkening sky. She looked around, at the desert stretching endlessly in all directions, at the small homestead that might be her prison or her sanctuary, at the door through which Taza had disappeared. Then she picked up her small bag of belongings and followed him inside. The interior of the house was sparse but clean. A stone fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, a shelf holding books she couldn't read in the fading light. Everything in its place. No dust, no clutter, no signs of the chaos that had defined her father's dying homestead. Taza stood near the fireplace, building a fire with efficient movements. Your room is through there, he said, nodding toward a doorway. I'll make food. You should rest. Elena didn't move. What happened to your sister? His hand stilled on the kindling. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, she was taken, sold, used up and thrown away. I was too young to stop it, too weak. By the time I was strong enough, she was already gone. He struck flint to steel, and sparks jumped into the waiting tinder. I carry that every day. I'm not your sister. I know. The fire caught, and warm light pushed back the gathering darkness. But maybe if I can give you what she never got, some of the weight gets lighter. Elena understood then. This wasn't about her. Or maybe it was, but it was also about every woman who'd been traded, sold, taken, used. It was about Taza trying to save a ghost by saving the living. Thank you, she said quietly. He looked up, surprised. For what? For not being another monster. She moved toward the doorway leading to her room. There's been enough of those. That night, Elena lay in a bed that wasn't hers in a house she didn't know, listening to the desert wind howl outside her window. The lock clicked into place with satisfying finality. On the other side of the wall, she could hear Taza moving through his evening routine, checking the locks, banking the fire, his footsteps retreating to what she assumed was his own room. She waited for fear to come, for panic, for the crushing realization of her situation to break her open. Instead, she felt something unexpected, something fragile and dangerous. Hope. Elena woke to the sound of an axe biting into wood. The rhythm was steady, methodical. The sound of someone who'd done this work 1,000 times and would do it 1,000 more. She lay still for a moment, orienting herself. Rough wool blanket, hard mattress, window showing a sky gone pale with early light. Not her father's house, not anywhere she'd ever been. Taza's homestead. The events of yesterday crashed back over her like a cold wave. The trading post, her father's betrayal, the long ride into the wilderness with a man who'd bought her freedom by purchasing her life. She sat up slowly, every muscle screaming protest. Riding for hours had left her body feeling like it had been wrung out and left to dry. The chopping continued outside, relentless. Elena stood, wincing, and went to the window. From here she could see the side of the house where Taza worked, his shirt already dark with sweat despite the cool morning air. He swung the axe with controlled force, splitting logs with single strikes. A pile of firewood grew steadily beside him. She watched him work for longer than she meant to. There was something almost hypnotic about the precision of his movements. No wasted energy, no unnecessary flourish, just competence honed by years of survival. When he finally paused to wipe his face, he glanced toward her window. Their eyes met for half a second before Elena jerked back, heat flooding her cheeks. She'd been caught staring like some foolish girl. She forced herself to move. Her small bag sat on the trunk at the foot of the bed, containing everything she owned in the world. 2 dresses, undergarments, a hairbrush her mother had given her, a small knife. Not much to show for 19 years of living. She changed into her other dress, finger-combed her tangled hair, and tried to look like someone who hadn't just had her entire life torn apart and reassembled wrong. When she emerged from her room, Taza was inside, building up the fire. He'd put on a clean shirt. His hair was wet, slicked back from his face. "There's a pump outside," he said without looking at her. "Water's cold but clean. Basin's on the shelf if you want to wash." "Thank you." He nodded once, still focused on the fire. Elena noticed he moved around the space with the careful awareness of someone who'd lived alone for a long time, keeping distance, never blocking doorways, making sure she always had a clear path to leave if she wanted. "I'm going to check the traps," he said when the fire was going strong. "Should be back by midday. There's bread in the tin on the shelf. Dried meat. Help yourself." "Do you want me to cook something? For when you get back?" The question seemed to surprise him. "If you want to, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I'm asking if you want me to." Taza studied her for a moment, and she got the sense he was recalculating something. "If you're offering, yes. I'd appreciate it." Then he was gone, slipping out the door with a rifle and a canvas bag. Elena watched through the window as he moved across the yard and disappeared into the scrub beyond, becoming part of the landscape so smoothly it was like watching smoke dissipate. She stood alone in the quiet house. This was her life now. This small adobe structure in the middle of nowhere, with a man she didn't know who'd given her freedom she didn't understand. Elena moved through the space slowly, taking inventory. The kitchen area was simple: a cast iron stove, shelves holding basic supplies, cooking implements hung from nails. Everything clean but worn. The books on the shelf were in English and what she assumed was Apache. One was a ledger, filled with careful notations about weather and crops and hunting yields. In the common area, a chair sat near the fireplace, its seat worn smooth from use. A small table held a whetstone and oil for maintaining tools. No decorations, no personal touches except for a single object on the mantel, a small carved bird, the wood dark with age and handling. Elena picked it up carefully. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every feather detailed, the beak slightly open as if caught mid-song. That was my sister's. She nearly dropped it. Taza stood in the doorway, so quiet she hadn't heard him return. "I thought you left," she said. "Forgot the knife for skinning." He moved to the shelf, retrieved a blade. "She carved birds, hundreds of them. That's the only one I have left." Elena set the carving back on the mantel with reverent care. "I'm sorry." "Everyone's sorry. Doesn't bring her back." He tucked the knife into his belt. "I'll be back by midday." This time she watched him leave, and he didn't look back. The morning stretched out empty before her. Elena found herself cleaning, not because the house needed it, but because her hands needed something to do. She swept the floor, reorganized the kitchen supplies, washed the few dishes sitting by the basin. Busy work. The kind of task that kept your mind from spiraling into places it shouldn't go. By the time the sun climbed toward its peak, she'd made bread dough from the supplies she found and had it rising near the fire. She'd also discovered a small root cellar behind the house, stocked with potatoes, onions, and dried peppers. Not much, but enough to work with. When Taza returned, he carried 3 rabbits and what looked like a sage hen. He paused in the doorway, taking in the smell of baking bread and whatever Elena had bubbling in the pot on the stove. "You've been busy," he said. "I told you I'd cook." He hung the game on hooks outside, then came back in to wash his hands in the basin. "I'll clean those later, after we eat." They sat at the small table in awkward silence, Elena serving stew made from dried meat, potatoes, and the herbs she'd found in his stores. She'd learned to cook from her mother, back when there was still hope that her father might pull the homestead back from the brink. That felt like another lifetime now. Taza ate steadily, efficiently. No compliments, but he finished his bowl and accepted a second helping without comment. "It's good," he finally said. "The bread, too. My mother's recipe." "She teach you?" "Before she died, 8 years ago now." Elena pushed food around her bowl. "She made my father promise to take care of me. I guess he kept that promise in his own way. By selling you. By making sure I ended up somewhere I'd survive." The words tasted bitter. "I don't think he cared much beyond that." Taza was quiet for a moment. "My father sold my sister for 3 horses and a rifle. Told himself he was securing the family's future. Maybe he even believed it." "Did you ever forgive him?" "He died before I got the chance. Probably saved us both a lot of pain." He stood, collecting their bowls. "I'll wash these. You cooked." "I can—" "You cooked," he repeated, firm but not unkind. "It's fair." She let him take the dishes. Watched him work at the basin with the same methodical care he brought to everything else. His hands were scarred. Old wounds layered over older ones, the kind of damage that came from a hard life lived without complaint. "What do you want me to do?" Elena asked. "While I'm here, what's expected of me?" Taza didn't turn around. "Nothing's expected. I told you that. You also told me I could work if I wanted to, so what kind of work needs doing?" He rinsed the last bowl and set it aside to dry. "Garden needs weeding, chickens need feeding, fences always need mending. If you want something to do, there's no shortage of tasks." "And if I don't want to do any of it?" Now he did turn, leaning against the basin. "Then you don't. I managed before you got here. I'll manage if you decide to sit and stare at the walls all day. That's not much of a life. Then make a different one." He pulled the knife from his belt. "I'm going to skin those rabbits. You're welcome to watch if you want to learn, or not. Your choice." He went outside, leaving Elena sitting at the table alone. Your choice. He kept saying that, kept offering her decisions like they were gifts she didn't know how to accept. For 19 years, someone else had always told her what to do. Her father, the expectations of society, the narrow role carved out for unmarried women on failing homesteads. She'd had no choices, or at least none that mattered. Now she had nothing but choices, and she didn't know what to do with them. She went outside. Taza had set up a work area near the shed, the rabbits hanging from a horizontal pole. He worked with a skinning knife, making precise cuts. It wasn't pretty work, but he did it without waste or hesitation. "You've done this before," Elena said. "Few thousand times, probably." He peeled back the hide in one smooth motion. "You eat meat, you should know where it comes from." "My father always did the butchering." "And now?" "Now I guess I should learn." He glanced at her, something almost like approval in his eyes. "All right, come here. Watch first, then try." She moved closer, fighting the urge to recoil from the blood. Taza walked her through the process step by step. Where to cut, how to separate hide from meat, what parts to keep, and what to discard. His voice stayed level, instructional. When he finished the first rabbit, he handed her the knife. "Your turn." Elena's hands shook as she made the first cut. She did it wrong, went too deep, and cursed under her breath. "It's fine," Taza said. "Try again, shallower this time." She did. It went better. Not perfect, but better. By the time she'd finished butchering her first rabbit, her hands were covered in blood and her stomach was churning, but she'd done it. She'd taken a life that Taza had caught and turned it into food they could eat. "Not bad," he said, examining her work. "Messy, but you got the important parts right." "Is it always this hard?" "First few times, yeah. Then it's just work." He took the knife back, cleaned it on a rag. "Nothing stays hard forever. You just get used to it." They worked together to prepare the remaining game, Taza doing most of the work while Elena tried to absorb the lessons. When they finished, he showed her how to preserve the meat, rubbing it with salt, hanging it in the smokehouse behind the shed. "This'll last us a week or two," he said. "Longer if we're careful." "What happens when it runs out?" "I hunt more, or we eat from the garden, or we go hungry for a bit." He shrugged. "That's life out here, cycles, good days and bad ones." "Sounds lonely." "It is." He didn't elaborate. That night they ate in that same awkward silence, the space between them filled with all the questions neither knew how to ask. After dinner, Taza retreated to his room early. Elena heard him moving around, the creak of his bed as he settled in. She sat by the fire for a long time, staring into the flames, trying to figure out what she was supposed to feel. Grateful? Angry? Afraid? All of it crashed together in her chest like competing storms, and she didn't have words for any of it. The days that followed fell into an uneasy rhythm. Taza would wake before dawn, do whatever work needed doing, chopping wood, checking traps, repairing fences. Elena would wake later, cook breakfast if she felt like it, find tasks to occupy her hands. Sometimes they'd work in the same space, Taza teaching her how to mend leather or sharpen tools or read the weather in the shape of the clouds. Other times they'd go hours without speaking, each lost in their own thoughts. She learned he was a man of routines. Every morning he'd check the perimeter of the property, walking the same path. Every evening he'd clean his weapons and tools, maintaining them with meticulous care. He wasted nothing. Scraps from cooking went to the chickens, ashes from the fire went to the garden, broken items got repaired instead of discarded. He also never touched her. Not once. Not even accidentally. If they passed in a doorway, he'd step back and wait. If he needed to show her how to do something, he'd demonstrate on himself or on an object, never placing his hands over hers. The distance was deliberate, careful, and it should have made Elena feel safe. Instead, it made her feel like a curse he was trying not to catch. 2 weeks in, she confronted him about it. They were working in the garden together, Taza turning soil while Elena weeded between the rows of struggling vegetables. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat ran down both their faces. "Why won't you touch me?" Elena asked. Taza's shovel paused mid-thrust. "What?" "You act like I'm made of glass, or poison. Every time we're in the same space, you keep this distance between us like I might shatter or contaminate you." He drove the shovel into the ground and leaned on it. I'm trying to be respectful. You're trying to pretend I don't exist. That's not... He stopped. Started again. I'm trying to give you space. After everything you've been through, I thought you'd want that. What I want, Elena said, surprising herself with the heat in her voice, is to not feel like a ghost in my own life. You bought me to save me, fine. But treating me like I'm too fragile to exist normally doesn't help anyone. I didn't buy you to... He cut himself off, frustration flashing across his face. I don't know what you want from me, Elena. You want me to act like this is normal? Like you being here isn't because your father sold you like property? Because I can't do that. I can't pretend this situation isn't broken. I'm not asking you to pretend. I'm asking you to stop treating me like I'm about to break. Maybe I'm the one who's about to break. The words came out sharp, and Taza looked as surprised as Elena felt. He turned away, hands gripping the shovel handle. You think this is easy for me? Having you here? Every time I look at you, I see her, my sister, every bad thing that happened to her that I couldn't stop. And I know, his voice cracked, I know I can't save her by saving you. I know that's not how this works, but I have to try anyway, because if I don't, what was any of it for? Silence settled over the garden like dust. Elena set down her weeding tool and stood. I'm not your sister. I know. I'm not your redemption either. I know that too. She moved closer, forcing him to look at her. Then stop using me as a stand-in for your guilt. I'm here. I'm real. And I'm trying to figure out how to exist in this bizarre situation we're both trapped in. But I can't do that if you won't let me be an actual person instead of a symbol. Taza stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. You're right. I'm sorry. Don't apologize, just be normal, or whatever passes for normal out here. Something almost like a smile tugged at his mouth. I'm not sure I remember what normal is. Then we'll figure it out together. The word hung between them. Together. Implying partnership, implying something more than owner and owned, savior and saved. Taza extended his hand. Deal. Elena took it. His palm was rough with calluses, warm from the sun. He shook once, firm but brief, then released her and went back to work. But something had shifted. Some invisible wall had cracked. After that conversation, things got easier. Not perfect. Nothing about their situation could be perfect, but easier. Taza stopped treating her like she might evaporate if he breathed too hard. They talked more, actual conversations instead of careful exchanges of necessary information. She learned he'd fought in the Apache wars, survived things he wouldn't discuss, and eventually made peace with the fact that fighting would never bring back what he'd lost. He learned she'd wanted to be a teacher once, before her mother died and her father started drinking away their future. You still could, Taza said one evening as they sat by the fire, mending clothes. Be a teacher. There's a mission school in Mescalero. They're always looking for help. I don't think they'd take someone with my history. What history? Woman who left her father's house? Plenty of people do that. Woman who was sold to an Apache warrior and chose to stay. Fair point. He threaded his needle. But the world's bigger than people's narrow opinions. You want something, you should take it. Is that what you did when you claimed this land? I didn't claim it. I survived here long enough that everyone else stopped trying to take it from me. There's a difference. Elena pulled a stitch tight. You ever think about leaving, going somewhere else? Every day. He bit off the thread. But everywhere else is worse. At least here I know what's trying to kill me. She laughed before she could stop herself. Taza looked up, startled. Sorry, Elena said. That was dark. But true. And then, impossibly, he smiled. Just a quick flash of teeth, gone almost before she registered it. But it changed his whole face, made him look younger, less haunted. She wanted to see it again. The weeks turned over. Elena grew stronger, her hands developing calluses from garden work and chores. Her skin darkened from hours spent in the sun. She learned to shoot Taza's rifle, to track small game, to read the signs of approaching weather. She learned where he kept his spare ammunition, which tools were for what purposes, how to make soap from animal fat and lye. She also learned his silences, There was the comfortable silence of working together, both focused on tasks. The contemplative silence when he stared into the fire at night, lost in memories he wouldn't share. And the tense silence that came over him sometimes without warning, usually when riders passed on the distant road or when storms rolled in from the south. "You expecting trouble?" she asked during one of these episodes. "Always." He stood at the window watching the empty horizon. "Out here, trouble's the only thing you can count on." "That's a grim way to live." "It's kept me alive this long." 2 months after her arrival, the first real test came. Elena was in the garden, harvesting the few vegetables that had managed to survive the harsh conditions, when she heard horses. Multiple riders, coming fast. She straightened, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. 4 men rode into the yard, white men, from their dress and bearing. One wore a merchant's coat. The others looked like hired muscle, the kind of men who solved problems with fists and guns. Taza emerged from the shed, rifle in hand but not raised. His whole body had gone still in that dangerous way Elena had learned to recognize. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" His voice was flat. "Careful." The merchant smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Taza roarin'. Heard you had a white woman living out here. Figured we'd come see for ourselves." Elena's stomach dropped. "What business is it of yours who lives on my land?" Taza asked. "Well, that's the thing." The merchant leaned forward in his saddle. "We've been getting reports. Concerned citizens worried about a Christian woman being held by by someone like you. Just wanted to make sure everything's above board." "Everything's legal. I have papers." "Oh, I'm sure you do. But papers don't tell the whole story, do they?" His eyes found Elena. "Miss? You all right over there? This man treating you proper?" Elena stood frozen. This was different from the sheriff. The sheriff had been bound by law, however reluctantly. These men had no such constraints. "I'm fine," she managed. "You don't look fine. You look like a woman who's been working in the sun like a field hand. That how he's got you living? Hard labor?" "I'm working in my garden," Elena said, forcing her voice steady. "By choice." One of the hired men spat tobacco juice. "Don't look like much of a choice to me. White woman living with an Apache doing manual labor. Ain't natural." Taza's grip tightened on his rifle. "You've seen she's alive and well. Time for you to leave." "We'll leave when we're satisfied she's here of her own free will." The merchant dismounted. "Miss, why don't you come over here, away from him, so we can talk properly?" "I don't want to." "I insist." He took a step toward her. Taza moved between them, rifle coming up to a ready position. "That's far enough." "You threatening me, boy?" The word hung in the air like poison. Taza's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. "I'm defending my property. You're trespassing." "Your property." The merchant's smile turned ugly. "That what she is? Property?" "That's what you're trying to make her." Taza didn't blink. "I gave her freedom. You're here to take it away." "I'm here to rescue her from a savage." The other 3 men had spread out, hands drifting toward weapons. Elena realized with sickening clarity that this could turn into a killing situation very quickly. She moved without thinking, stepping out from behind Taza and walking directly toward the merchant. "Elena, don't—" Taza started. She ignored him, stopped 3 feet from the merchant and looked him dead in the eye. "You want to rescue me?" she asked. "From what? From having enough to eat? From sleeping in a room with a lock on the door? From being treated like a human being instead of a transaction?" "Miss, you don't understand what you're saying." "I understand perfectly." Her voice rose. "My father sold me. Literally sold me, like I was livestock. This man," she gestured at Taza, "gave me choices my own blood never did. So if you're here to rescue me, you're about 2 months too late and looking at the wrong person." The merchant's face flushed. "You've been corrupted, turned against your own kind. That's what they do." "My own kind?" Elena stepped closer, anger burning through her fear. "My own kind sold me for water rights. My own kind is standing in my yard right now, telling me I'm too stupid to know my own mind. You want to rescue someone? Go find the girls whose fathers are drowning in debt and desperation. Go save them before they end up in situations actually worth escaping. But leave me alone." One of the hired men shifted uncomfortably. "Boss, maybe we should—" "Quiet." The merchant's eyes had gone hard. "Miss Hale, I'm trying to help you, but you're making this very difficult. I'm making it impossible. Because I don't need your help. I need you to leave. And if I don't think that's what you really want, if I think you've been coerced into defending your captor, then you'd be a fool and a hypocrite." Elena's hands balled into fists. "You don't care about me. You care about your image of how the world should work, about keeping white women pure and separate, about maintaining the natural order. Well, your natural order sold me, so forgive me if I choose a different one." The merchant stared at her. Behind her, Elena could feel Taza's presence like a wall at her back, not caging her in, but supporting her, trusting her to fight this battle with words while he kept the guns from firing. Finally, the merchant shook his head. "You're lost. May the Lord have mercy on your soul." He remounted. His men followed suit, though they kept watching Taza like he might shoot them in the back. "This isn't over," the merchant said. "People need to know what's happening out here. The truth." "The truth is I'm free," Elena said. "Tell them that." The riders left, kicking up dust. Elena watched them go until they disappeared over the ridge. Only then did she start shaking. Taza lowered his rifle. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." Her legs felt like water. "They would have shot you." "Maybe, probably." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you." "For what?" "For choosing, when it mattered." Elena turned to look at him, really look at him. This man who'd bought her to set her free, who kept his distance but taught her to survive, who carried ghosts but fought to make sure she didn't become one. "I meant what I said," she told him, "about being free. I am. Even out here in the middle of nowhere with you, maybe especially here." Something crossed his face, surprise, gratitude, maybe the beginning of hope. "Good. That's good." They stood there in the yard, the afternoon sun painting everything gold, and Elena realized she'd stopped thinking about leaving. Somewhere along the way, without meaning to, she'd started thinking about staying. That night, Taza built the fire higher than usual. They sat on opposite sides of it, both processing what had happened. "They'll come back," Taza said eventually, "or send someone else. That merchant type. They don't give up easy." "I know." "You should be ready, in case they come when I'm not here." Elena pulled her knees to her chest. "What would you want me to do?" "Whatever keeps you alive." He poked at the fire with a stick. "If that means going with them, you go. If it means hiding until they leave, you hide. If it means shooting them," he gestured toward the rifle leaning against the wall, "you shoot them. I don't think I could kill someone. You'd be surprised what you can do when your life depends on it." They fell quiet again. The fire crackled. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the dark hills. "Taza?" Elena said softly. "Yeah? Why did you really take me? The truth this time?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Because I saw the look in your eyes. When your father offered you up like you were nothing, that look of—" He struggled for words. "Of realizing the person who's supposed to protect you is the one you need protection from. I've seen that look before. And I swore if I ever saw it again, I'd do something about it. Even though it complicated your life. Especially because of that. Simple lives are for people who can afford them. I can't, so I might as well complicate mine doing something that matters." Elena's throat tightened. "It matters to me, in case you were wondering." "I was," he admitted. "I've been wondering since the day we met whether I did the right thing, whether I made it worse somehow." "You didn't." She met his eyes across the fire. "You made it possible. That's not the same as making it easy or perfect or anything like what I expected my life to be. But it's possible. And that's more than I had before." Taza nodded slowly. And this time, when he smiled, it wasn't just a flash. It stayed. The months continued their slow roll toward winter. Elena learned more, grew stronger, became something she'd never been before, capable. Not just of cooking and cleaning, but of surviving, of making decisions, of defending herself and her choices with words sharp enough to cut. She also learned Taza, learned he had nightmares sometimes, thrashing awake in the dark. Learned he hummed while he worked, old songs in a language she didn't understand. Learned he was patient with everything except himself, demanding perfection from his own actions while accepting her mistakes with quiet grace. They weren't friends exactly. The circumstances that had brought them together were too strange for simple friendship. But they were something. Partners, maybe. Two people sharing space and survival, learning to exist alongside each other without causing damage. And if sometimes Elena caught herself watching him work with something warmer than gratitude, she kept it to herself. If sometimes Taza's eyes lingered on her a moment too long before he looked away, neither of them mentioned it. The desert had taught them both patience. Whatever this was between them, it would unfold in its own time. Or it wouldn't. Either way, they'd survive it. They'd survived worse. The first frost came early that year, turning the desert into something crystalline and strange. Elena woke to find ice patterns on her window, delicate as lace and just as fragile. Outside, Taza was already moving through his morning routine, breath-forming clouds in the cold air. She'd been living at the homestead for 4 months now, long enough that the rhythms of this life had seeped into her bones, long enough that she no longer thought about leaving every day. Some days she didn't think about it at all. That should have worried her more than it did. She dressed quickly, layering clothes against the chill, and emerged to find Taza stoking the fire. He'd already brought in extra wood, anticipating the cold snap. "Winter's coming early," he said without preamble. "We need to make sure we're ready." "What does ready look like?" "More firewood than you think we need. Meat preserved, tools maintained, water stored in case the pump freezes." He straightened, rolling his shoulders. "And fixing that leak in the roof before it becomes a problem." They spent the morning working together, Elena helping him haul firewood while Taza made trip after trip from the woodpile to the shed. By midday, they were both sweating despite the cold, muscles burning from the labor. "How bad do winters get out here?" Elena asked as they took a break, sharing water from the canteen. "Bad enough. We'll be snowed in for days at a time, maybe weeks if we're unlucky." He wiped his mouth. "You sure you want to stay for that?" It was the first time he'd asked directly. They danced around the question for months, both pretending she might leave any day, both knowing she wouldn't. "Where else would I go?" Elena said. "Alamogordo, Roswell, anywhere with people and civilization." "Civilization didn't do much for me before. Why would it now?" Taza studied her, and she could see him weighing something. "If you stay through winter, you're committed. Can't change your mind when you're hip-deep in snow and sick of eating preserved rabbit." "Then I guess I better make peace with rabbit." He almost smiled. Almost. Then his expression shifted, sharpening. Elena followed his gaze and saw dust rising on the eastern road. Riders again. "Inside," Taza said quietly. "Get the rifle." "How many?" "Can't tell yet. Just move." Elena didn't argue. She went inside, grabbed the rifle from its place by the door, and checked that it was loaded like Taza had taught her. Her hands were steady. That surprised her. 4 months ago, they would have shaken. Through the window, she watched the riders approach. 5 of them this time. And at the front, sitting his horse like he owned the world, was her father. The bottom dropped out of her stomach. Marcus Hale looked older than when she'd last seen him, thinner. There was a desperate edge to him that hadn't been there before. Or maybe she'd just never noticed it. Behind him rode Sheriff Garrett and 3 men Elena didn't recognize. Deputized locals, probably, brought along to make this official. Taza stood in the yard, rifle in hand but pointed at the ground, waiting. "Taza Roarin'," Garrett called out as they pulled up. "We need to have a conversation." "About what?" "About Miss Elena Hale, who was taken from her legal guardian 4 months ago under dubious circumstances." "There was nothing dubious about it. We had papers. You saw them yourself." "Papers signed under duress," Marcus cut in, his voice carrying that false righteousness Elena remembered too well. "My daughter was coerced. I've come to take her home." Elena moved to the door. Taza shot her a warning glance, but she ignored it. She stepped outside, rifle held loosely at her side. "I'm right here, Pa," she said. "You can ask me directly, instead of talking about me like I'm not present." Marcus's face went through several expressions before settling on paternal concern. It looked practiced. "Elena, Sweetheart, thank heaven you're all right. I'm fine. You don't look fine. You look. He gestured vaguely at her. You're too thin. Your skin's dark from the sun. Your hands, those are working hands. What has he done to you? Elena looked down at her hands, calloused, scarred from garden work and learning to handle tools, strong hands, capable hands. He taught me to survive, more than you ever did. I taught you everything you needed to know for a proper life. You taught me to be quiet and obedient, to make myself small so I wouldn't be a burden. The words came out harder than she intended. Then you sold me the moment it became convenient. I made an arrangement for your future. You made an arrangement for yourself, her voice rose. You needed water rights. You needed a way out of your debts. So you traded me like I was currency. Garrett shifted in his saddle. Miss Hale, your father has expressed concerns about your well-being. He's filed a formal complaint claiming you were taken against your will. Then he's lying. Elena, please. Marcus tried again, his voice breaking. I know you're confused. I know he's filled your head with ideas, turned you against your own family. You turned me against you all by yourself. Elena stepped forward. The moment you shook hands on that deal, you stopped being my family. I'm still your father. Legally, no, you're not. You signed away your parental claim, remember? To get your water access. Marcus's jaw tightened. I've consulted with lawyers. That agreement can be challenged. A man can't simply sell his daughter like property. It's not legal. But it is moral, Elena shot back. You can't have it both ways, Pa. Either I'm property that you sold, or I'm a person who made a choice. Pick one. You're 19 years old. You don't know what you're choosing. I know exactly what I'm choosing. I'm choosing not to go back. Silence fell over the yard. One of the deputies coughed uncomfortably. Taza stood very still, letting Elena fight this battle, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, ready to intervene if weapons came out. Sheriff Garrett leaned forward in his saddle. Miss Hale, I need you to be very clear about something. Are you being held here against your will? No. Has this man hurt you in any way? No. Threatened you? The only people who've threatened me are the ones who keep showing up claiming to rescue me. Garrett's expression hardened. You understand what you're saying? You're claiming to want to stay here, living with an Apache warrior, isolated from civilization? I'm not claiming anything. I'm stating facts. Elena, Marcus's voice had gone pleading. Think about your future. What kind of life is this? What happens when you're older, when you need medical care, or when he gets tired of you, or when what? Elena cut him off. When the world judges me for making unconventional choices, I stopped caring about the world's opinion the day you put it ahead of my well-being. I did what I thought was best. No, you did what was easiest for you. There's a difference. Marcus's face flushed red. You ungrateful. I gave you 19 years. Fed you, clothed you, kept a roof over your head. That's called being a parent. You don't get credit for meeting the bare minimum. And what is he? Marcus jabbed a finger toward Taza. What's he to you? Your keeper? Your master? He's... Elena paused, searching for the right word. Partner felt too intimate. Friend felt too simple. He's someone who respects my choices, which is more than you ever did. Taza spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but carrying. She can leave any time she wants. I've told her that from the beginning. Forgive me if I don't trust the word of a savage, Marcus spat. The word hung in the air like smoke. Taza didn't flinch, but something cold moved through his eyes. You want to insult me? Go ahead, he said evenly. But it doesn't change the facts. Your daughter chose to stay. She's choosing it again right now, in front of witnesses. Unless you plan to kidnap her at gunpoint, this conversation is over. I could have you arrested, Marcus said, for abduction, for corruption of morals. You could try. Taza's grip on his rifle tightened slightly. But you'd have to prove I forced her, and she's standing right there telling you I didn't. Garrett cleared his throat. Mr. Hale, I understand this is difficult, but your daughter is an adult. She's stated clearly and repeatedly that she's here by choice. Unless you have evidence of coercion or abuse, actual evidence, not assumptions, there's nothing I can legally do. So, so you're just going to leave her here? With him? I'm going to respect her stated wishes, same as the law requires. Marcus turned to Elena one more time, and for a moment she saw something like genuine pain in his eyes. Please, come home. We can fix this. We can make things right. There's no home to come back to, Elena said softly. You made sure of that. I made a mistake. I admit it. But you're my daughter, my only child. I can't just... His voice broke. I can't just lose you. You lost me the moment you decided I was for sale. She watched something die in her father's face, the last ember of hope, maybe, or the final pretense that he'd been anything other than selfish. He sat there on his horse, a broken man trying to retrieve something he'd thrown away, and Elena felt nothing. No pity, no anger, not even satisfaction, just emptiness where her filial duty used to live. Let's go, Garrett said to Marcus. There's nothing more to do here. I could fight this, take it to a judge, and lose. You signed legal documents, Hale. Your daughter is of age and stating her position clearly. No judge in the territory would side with you. Marcus stared at Elena for a long moment. Then, quietly, I hope you know what you're doing. I do. Finally. He turned his horse. The deputies followed. Sheriff Garrett lingered a moment longer. Miss Hale, he said, my offer stands. You ever change your mind, you come to Alamogordo. We'll help you. I know. Thank you. He nodded once to Taza, acknowledgement, maybe, or warning, and rode after the others. Elena and Taza stood in the yard, watching them disappear into the distance. When the dust had settled and the hoofbeats had faded, Elena realized she was shaking. Not from fear, from the sheer magnitude of what she'd just done. She'd chosen. Publicly. Irrevocably. She'd burned the bridge back to her old life and committed herself to this one. You all right? Taza asked. I don't know. Elena set the rifle down before she dropped it. I just told my father to leave me with the man he sold me to. That's not normal. Nothing about this situation is normal. No, but it's mine now. I made it mine. She turned to look at him. Does that scare you? Terrify me, he admitted. You just tied yourself to me in front of a sheriff and witnesses. People are going to talk. They're going to make assumptions about what we are to each other. What are we to each other? Taza was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. But we're going to have to figure it out. They went inside. Elena's hands were still shaking as she set the rifle back in its place. Taza built up the fire while she stood in the middle of the room, trying to process what had just happened. He'll probably spread stories, she said. My father. He'll tell people I've been corrupted or coerced or... Let him. Taza's voice was flat. People believe what they want to believe. Nothing we say will change that. It doesn't bother you what they'll think? I stopped caring what people think about me a long time ago. Saves energy. He stood, wiping his hands on his pants. But if it bothers you, it should. Shouldn't it? I should care about my reputation, about what people say. Should is a trap. You do what you need to survive. Everything else is noise. Elena sank into the chair by the fire. I don't know how to do this. Be this person who chooses herself over everything else. You're already doing it. You've been doing it for months. This felt different, bigger. Because it was. Taza pulled the other chair closer and sat facing her. You drew a line, said who you are and what you want. That's not small. What if I made the wrong choice? Then you made it, and you'll live with it, same as every other choice. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. But for what it's worth, I don't think you did. I think you chose the only thing that made sense for you. Staying in the middle of nowhere with an Apache warrior who bought me from my father? Staying where you're treated like a human being instead of a transaction. The words hit harder than Elena expected. She looked at Taza, really looked at him. At the scars on his face and hands, the silver in his hair, the amber eyes that had seen too much and survived anyway. This man who'd taken her in not because he wanted something from her, but because he couldn't bear to see another woman used up, and discarded. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For letting me fight my own battle out there. For not stepping in and taking over." "Wasn't my battle to fight." He stood, moving back to the fire. "You needed to claim yourself. I couldn't do that for you." They spent the rest of the day working in careful silence, both processing what had happened. Elena helped Taza patch the roof leak, holding tools while he worked. The physical labor helped settle something in her chest, burning off the nervous energy that had been crackling through her since the confrontation. That night they sat by the fire longer than usual, neither quite ready to retreat to their separate rooms. "What happens now?" Elena asked eventually. "Same as before. We survive. We work. Winter comes, and we deal with it. But it's different now. Everyone knows I chose to stay. Does that change how you feel about being here?" Elena considered. "No, but it changes how permanent it feels." "Nothing's permanent. You can still leave." "Could I, though? Really?" She pulled her knees up. "After what I said out there, after I publicly rejected my father and defended you, where would I go? What kind of welcome would I get in any town in the territory?" Taza was quiet. They both knew the answer. She'd marked herself. The woman who chose an Apache over her own father, who defended him to a sheriff, who lived isolated from civilization without shame. She'd become a scandal, a cautionary tale, the kind of story people would tell their daughters as a warning. "I'm sorry," Taza said finally. "If I'd known it would trap you like this." "It didn't trap me. I trapped myself." Elena managed a thin smile. "And I'd do it again, because the alternative is going back to being someone's property, and I won't do that. Even if it means being an outcast? I've been an outcast my whole life, just in quieter ways." She stared into the fire. "At least now I'm choosing it." Taza nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, you're not an outcast here." "What am I here?" He thought about it. "Essential." The words settled over her like a blanket. Not property, not burden, not obligation. Essential. "You too," she said softly. They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the fire burn down. When Elena finally went to bed, she lay awake for a long time, listening to Taza move through his evening routine. The familiar sounds had become comforting. The clink of tools being put away, the soft pad of his feet on the wooden floor, the creak of his bed as he settled in. She'd chosen this. All of it. The isolation, the hard work, the man on the other side of the wall who'd given her the freedom to choose in the first place. And for the first time since her mother died, Elena felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The next morning brought more riders. Elena was feeding the chickens when she heard them coming. Not the official procession of yesterday, but something quieter, more dangerous. 3 men, rough-looking, with guns worn openly, and eyes that assessed the homestead like predators sizing up prey. She dropped the feed bucket and ran for the house. "Taza!" He was already moving, rifle in hand. He took one look at the approaching riders and cursed under his breath. "Inside! Lock your door! Don't come out unless I call for you." "What? Now, Elena." The urgency in his voice sent her scrambling. She locked herself in her room, heart hammering, and watched through the window as the 3 men rode into the yard. "Well, well," the lead rider said, dismounting. He was big, scarred, with the look of someone who'd done violence so often it had become routine. "Taza Roran, heard some interesting stories about you." "State your business or leave," Taza said flatly. "Business is simple. We heard you got yourself a white woman. Thought we'd come see if you'd be willing to share." The words made Elena's stomach turn. "She's not for sale," Taza said. "And she's not for sharing. Everything's for sale if the price is right. Your father understood that. Sold his own daughter, didn't he? For 3 horses and a rifle?" The man grinned. "We got horses. Got guns too. What do you say?" "I say you have 3 seconds to get back on those horses before I start shooting." The other 2 riders spread out, flanking. Classic intimidation tactics. Taza didn't move, but Elena could see his weight shift, readying himself. "Now that's not friendly," the leader said. "We come all this way for a social visit." 3. "And you threaten us? That's no way to—" 2. One of the flanking riders reached for his gun. Taza shot him. The sound cracked across the yard like thunder. The rider went down, clutching his shoulder, screaming. The other two men froze. "Next one dies," Taza said calmly, rifle already leveled at the leader. "Your choice. You shot my man. I warned you. Now you've got 2 seconds to collect him and leave." "You think you can just—" Taza fired again. This time the bullet kicked up dirt between the leader's feet. 1 second. They broke. The unhurt rider scrambled to help his wounded companion onto a horse, while the leader backed toward his mount, hands raised. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You can't protect her forever." "Don't have to. Just have to protect her longer than you're willing to try." Taza advanced a step. "Now get off my land before I decide to finish what you started." They fled, leaving a trail of blood and dust. Taza stood in the yard until they were out of sight, then let out a long breath. His hands were shaking slightly when he lowered the rifle. Elena unlocked her door and came out. "Are you all right?" "Fine. You?" "Scared." "Who were they?" "Opportunists. Men who heard about you and figured they'd try their luck." He checked his rifle, reloading with practiced efficiency. "They'll probably be back with more people." "Because I chose to stay." "Because you're here at all." He looked at her, and there was something raw in his expression. "This is what I was trying to protect you from. This is why I gave you the choice to leave, because staying makes you a target. I'm a target either way. At least here, I have you. I'm one man, Elena. I can't fight off everyone who comes looking. Then teach me to fight too." He stared at her. "What?" "You heard me. Teach me to shoot better, to defend myself, to be more than someone who hides in her room while you handle everything." She moved closer. "If I'm staying, if I'm committed to this life, then I need to be able to protect myself." Taza was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "All right. We start tomorrow. But it won't be easy. Nothing about this is easy. I've made peace with that." They spent the rest of the day reinforcing defenses. Taza showed her where he'd placed supplies for emergencies: ammunition, food, water. He walked her through what to do if he was injured or killed, where the nearest settlement was, how to survive alone if it came to that. It was grim work, planning for worst-case scenarios. But it was also practical, necessary, and it made Elena feel less like a liability and more like a partner in her own survival. That evening, they ate in silence, both aware of how close things had come to violence, how easily it could have gone differently. "I meant what I said out there," Taza said eventually, "about not being able to protect you forever. I know. If more come, if they come in numbers I can't fight, you need to be ready to run. Promise me." Elena set down her fork. "I'm not promising that." "Elena, no, I'm not running. I'm not going back to being someone who hides and hopes someone else will save her." She met his eyes. "I'm staying, whatever comes. And if you have a problem with that, you should have thought twice before teaching me to be brave." Something shifted in Taza's expression. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition. "You're going to be the death of me," he said. But there was no heat in it. "Then we'll die together. At least it'll be interesting." He laughed, actually laughed. A short, rough sound, but genuine. "You're insane." "Probably, but you're stuck with me now." "Yeah." His smile faded to something softer. "I am." They finished eating in more companionable silence. Outside, the sun set over the red hills, painting the world in shades of gold and blood. Winter was coming, and with it, who knew what else? More riders, maybe. More people trying to force Elena back into the box she'd crawled out of. More violence, more danger, more reasons to run. But Elena had made her choice. She'd stood in front of her father and a sheriff and declared herself free. She'd watched Taza shoot a man to protect her and decided she wanted to learn to do the same. She'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross, and she wasn't interested in going back. This was her life now, this homestead, this man, this harsh, beautiful landscape, these choices, these consequences, this freedom she'd fought for and would keep fighting for as long as she had breath in her body. Let the world judge. Let them come with their rescue missions and their moral outrage and their attempts to force her back into civilized society. She'd survived her father's betrayal. She'd survived the desert. She'd survive whatever came next, and she wouldn't do it alone. The first snow came 3 weeks later, turning the world white and silent. Elena woke to find Taza already outside, checking the animals and securing anything that might blow away in the wind. She dressed quickly, layering everything she owned, and joined him in the yard. The cold bit through her clothes like teeth. "Storm's coming," he said, nodding toward the north where dark clouds gathered like bruises. "Big one. We'll be inside for days. We ready?" "As ready as we can be." He handed her a bucket. "Help me get extra water from the pump before it freezes." They worked together in the bitter cold, hauling water, bringing in the last of the firewood, moving the chickens to the sheltered coop. By the time they finished, Elena's fingers were numb and her breath came in ragged gasps. Inside, Taza built the fire high while Elena inventoried their supplies. Preserved meat, dried vegetables, flour, salt. Enough for a few weeks if they were careful, maybe a month if they stretched it. "Could be worse," she said. "Could be better." He hung his wet coat near the fire. "But we'll manage." The storm hit that afternoon like a fist. Wind howled around the house, driving snow against the windows with relentless force. The temperature dropped so fast Elena could watch the water in the basin start to freeze. She and Taza moved through the small house, stuffing rags in cracks, banking the fire, preparing for a siege. By nightfall, the world beyond the windows had disappeared into white chaos. "How long do these usually last?" Elena asked, watching snow pile against the glass. 3 days, sometimes a week. Taza added another log to the fire. "Longest I've been snowed in was 12 days. Nearly went crazy from the silence." "At least this time you won't be alone." He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Yeah, at least there's that." They ate a quiet dinner, both aware of how small their world had become. 4 walls and a fire. No escape, no distraction, just each other, and whatever conversation they could manage. "Tell me about your sister," Elena said suddenly. Taza's hand stilled on his bowl. "Why?" "Because you never do. You mention her, but you don't talk about her. What was she like?" He was quiet for so long, Elena thought he wouldn't answer. Then slowly, "Her name was Nalan. It means maiden. She was 3 years younger than me. Smart, stubborn as hell." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Used to make those birds she carved talk. Would put on whole performances, voices, and everything. Made our mother laugh." "What happened to her?" The smile died. "What happens to most Apache women who get taken? Sold to men who used her until she wasn't useful anymore. By the time I found where they'd taken her, she was already gone. Dead 6 months. Buried in an unmarked grave with a dozen other women nobody bothered to remember." Elena's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." "Everyone's sorry. Doesn't change anything." He stood, moving to the fire. "She was 15 when they took her. 15. Still carved her birds, still did those voices. And it didn't matter. None of it mattered." "It mattered to you." "Yeah. Look where that got me." He gestured around the small house. "Living alone in the middle of nowhere. Trying to make peace with ghosts that won't stay buried." "You're not alone anymore." He turned to look at her, firelight painting shadows across his scarred face. "No, I guess I'm not." The storm raged for 4 days. 4 days trapped inside with nothing to do but tend the fire, ration their food, and find ways to keep from going stir-crazy. Elena read from Taza's books, sounding out words in Apache while he corrected her pronunciation. He taught her card games his mother had taught him, games with rules that made no sense but passed the time. They talked about everything and nothing, childhoods, scars, dreams they'd given up on. On the 3rd night, Elena woke to the sound of Taza thrashing in his room. Nightmares again. She'd heard them before but always pretended she hadn't, giving him the privacy of his demons. Tonight, though, the sounds were worse. Desperate. She got up, hesitated at his door, then knocked softly. "Taza?" The thrashing stopped. Silence. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice was rough, shaken. "You're not." "Go back to bed, Elena." She should have. Should have respected his walls, his need for distance. Instead, she opened the door. Taza sat on the edge of his bed, head in his hands, shirt soaked with sweat despite the cold. The small window showed nothing but snow and darkness. "I said I'm fine," he repeated without looking up. "And I'm saying you're a liar." Elena moved into the room, careful. "Talk to me." "There's nothing to talk about." "Then sit here in silence, but you don't have to do it alone." He looked up then, and the rawness in his expression nearly broke her. "You don't want to hear what's in my head." "Maybe not, but I'm here anyway." For a long moment, neither moved. Then Taza let out a breath that sounded like surrender. "It's always the same dream. I find her, Nalin. She's alive and I get there in time and I can save her. But when I reach for her, she turns to smoke, disappears. And I'm left standing there knowing I failed again. It was a dream. It's the truth. I did fail. I was too late, too weak, too—" His hands clenched. She needed me and I wasn't there. Elena sat down beside him, leaving space between them but making her presence felt. "You were a kid. What could you have done?" "Something, anything. Instead I survived and she didn't, and now I get to live with that every single day." "So you punish yourself. Live out here alone. Keep everyone at a distance. Because if you don't let anyone close, you can't fail them too." His jaw tightened. "That's simple, huh?" "I didn't say simple. I said that's what you're doing." She pulled her knees up. "But here's the thing. You already let me close, whether you meant to or not. And I'm still here, still alive, still choosing this." "You shouldn't have to." "I know. You keep saying that. You keep acting like I'm some burden you have to carry, some redemption you're trying to earn. But what if I'm just a person who wants to stay because this is better than anything else I've found?" Taza turned to look at her fully. In the dim light, his eyes were darker than usual, shadowed with old pain and new confusion. "Why would you want this?" "Because you see me. Not as property or obligation or some symbol of your past, just as me. Elena, that's rare enough to be worth fighting for." I don't know how to—" He struggled for words. "People don't stay. Everyone leaves eventually. Either they choose to or they're taken. That's just how it works." "Then I'll be the exception." "You can't promise that." "Watch me." They sat in silence, the storm howling outside like something hungry. Elena could feel Taza's internal struggle, the war between the walls he'd built and the human need for connection he'd tried so hard to bury. "I'm scared," he said finally, so quiet she almost missed it. "Of what?" "Of this, you, of letting myself believe it might actually work." He looked at his scarred hands. "Of caring about someone again and losing them." "That's the risk, though, isn't it? Caring always comes with the possibility of loss. You can protect yourself by staying alone, but that's just another kind of dying. And if I fail you like I failed her, then you fail, and we deal with it, but at least we tried." Taza was quiet for a long time. Then, slowly, he extended his hand. Not an offer, just an invitation. Elena took it, their calloused fingers interlocking. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Neither do I. But we're already doing it." They sat like that until the shaking in Taza's hands stopped, and his breathing evened out. When Elena finally went back to her room, the space between them felt different, smaller, less like a chasm and more like a choice they were both making. The storm broke on the 5th day. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of Taza already outside, shoveling paths through the snow. She dressed and joined him, taking the spare shovel from the shed. "You don't have to," he started. "I know. I want to." They worked together, clearing paths to the animals, the shed, the pump. The snow was deep, exhausting work, but the sky was blindingly blue and the air so cold it hurt to breathe. It felt like being reborn. By midday, they'd made enough progress to check on the livestock. The chickens had survived, huddled together for warmth. The horse was fine, shaking snow from her mane and eyeing them with what Elena could swear was reproach. "We need to hunt," Taza said, surveying their depleted supplies. "Storm like that drives animals down from the high country. should be easier to track. I'm coming with you. He started to argue, then seemed to think better of it. All right, but you do exactly what I say. Hunting in snow is different, dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. They set out the next morning, Taza carrying his rifle, while Elena brought the smaller gun he'd been teaching her to shoot. The landscape had transformed into something alien and beautiful, all familiar landmarks buried under white. Taza moved through it like he was part of it, reading signs Elena couldn't see. A disturbance in the snow here, broken branches there. He communicated mostly through hand signals, teaching her to be quiet, to watch, to wait. They found deer tracks an hour in. Fresh, Taza whispered. Maybe an hour old. Small herd, probably 3 or 4. How can you tell? Depth of the prints, spacing. See how they overlap here? That's 2 animals walking close together. Young ones, most likely. They followed the trail for another hour, moving slowly through the silent forest. Elena's feet were numb despite her boots, her fingers aching from the cold. But she didn't complain. Taza had trusted her enough to bring her, and she wouldn't prove him wrong. The deer were bedded down in a grove of pines, 3 of them seeking shelter from the wind. Taza signaled for Elena to stop, then slowly raised his rifle. The shot cracked across the morning. 1 deer dropped. The others bolted, disappearing into the white. Clean kill, Taza said with satisfaction. Come on, we need to field dress it before it freezes. He taught her how to gut the animal properly, how to preserve the hide, what parts to take, and what to leave for scavengers. It was brutal work, but Elena forced herself to pay attention. This was survival. This was the price of eating. When they finished, Taza looked at her blood-stained hands and wind-burned face. You did good. The words shouldn't have meant as much as they did, but coming from him, they felt like a medal. They dragged the carcass back to the homestead, taking turns pulling the makeshift sled Taza had fashioned from branches. By the time they arrived, the sun was setting and Elena was so tired she could barely stand. Go inside, Taza said. Warm up. I'll finish here. I can help. You did help. Now rest. Elena stumbled inside, built up the fire, and collapsed into the chair. Her whole body hurt. But it was good hurt, earned hurt, the kind that came from useful work instead of pointless suffering. When Taza came in an hour later, he had cuts of fresh meat wrapped in cloth. This'll last us a month if we're careful, maybe longer. We make a good team. He paused in the act of washing his hands. Yeah, we do. That night they ate fresh venison for the first time in weeks, the taste almost overwhelming after days of preserved rations. Elena cooked it with the last of their potatoes and some herbs from her dried stores, creating something that almost felt like celebration. This is good, Taza said. Really good. Don't sound so surprised. I'm not. He set down his fork. I'm not used to this. Meals that feel like more than just fuel. Someone to share them with. Get used to it. He smiled, actually smiled, full and genuine. I'm trying. The weeks that followed fell into a new rhythm. Harder than before, winter demanded constant work just to stay alive, but somehow easier too. They'd crossed some invisible threshold the night of the storm, stopped pretending their relationship was purely practical. They were partners now, in the truest sense, sharing work, sharing space, sharing the burden of survival. Elena learned to hunt, to track, to read weather signs in the clouds. Taza taught her everything he knew, patient even when she made mistakes. She taught him to cook things beyond simple sustenance, to find comfort in small rituals, to talk about his nightmares instead of bearing them alone. They worked on the homestead together, preparing for spring planting, repairing winter damage, planning improvements. It stopped being his land and became theirs, though neither said it out loud. In February, Elena got sick. It started as a cough, nothing serious. But in the bitter cold with limited resources, nothing stayed simple for long. Within 3 days, she was running a fever, barely able to stand. Taza moved her to his bed because it was closer to the fire. He stayed up all night, keeping watch, changing cold compresses on her forehead, forcing her to drink water even when she was too weak to hold the cup herself. You're going to be fine, he kept saying, like he could will it into truth. Elena wanted to believe him, but she'd seen people die from less, out in this harsh country where help was days away and medicine was scarce. On the fourth night, her fever spiked so high she started hallucinating. She saw her mother, young and healthy, reaching for her, saw her father on his horse riding away forever, saw Taza's sister carving a bird that turned into smoke in her hands. "Stay with me," Taza's voice cut through the visions. "Elena, stay with me." "I'm trying." "Try harder." His hand gripped hers, solid and real. "You don't get to leave. Not like this. I won't allow it. Don't think you get a vote. I'm taking one anyway." She might have laughed if she'd had the strength. The fever broke the next morning. Elena woke weak and wrung out but clear-headed. Taza was slumped in the chair beside the bed, asleep, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he'd aged years and days. "Taza," she whispered. His eyes snapped open immediately. "You're awake. How do you feel?" "Like I got trampled by horses, but alive." Something crumpled in his expression, relief so profound it was almost pain. "You scared the hell out of me." "Sorry." "Don't apologize. Just don't do it again." "I'll try." He helped her sit up, brought her water and broth, watched her like she might disappear if he looked away. It took Elena a week to regain her strength, and through it all, Taza barely left her side. "You didn't have to do this," she said one afternoon, watching him prepare more broth. "Take care of me like this." "Where else would I be?" "I don't know." "Outside. Working. Living your life." "This is my life now." He brought her the bowl. "Has been since the day you decided to stay." "That doesn't obligate you to—" "It's not obligation." He sat on the edge of the bed. "When you were sick, when I thought I might lose you, I realized something." "What?" "That I can't go back to being alone. I tried it for years. It kept me alive, but it didn't give me a reason to live." "You did that." He looked at her directly. "You're not my sister's ghost. You're not my redemption. You're Elena. And I need you to keep being that." Her throat tightened. "I need you too." "Good." He stood, awkward suddenly. "Then we're agreed. We're stuck with each other." "Seems like it." "Could be worse." "Could be better too." He smiled, working on that. By the time spring started showing its first tentative signs, buds on trees, warmer days, snow retreating from the high country, Elena had fully recovered. The illness had left her thinner, weaker, but also somehow clearer. Being that close to dying had burned away the last of her doubts. This was her life. This homestead, this man, this choice she'd made and kept making every day. Not because she was trapped or had nowhere else to go, but because she wanted it, wanted him, wanted the hard, beautiful reality they were building together. One evening in early March, they sat outside watching the sunset paint the red hills in shades of fire. The air still carried winter's bite, but there was promise in it too. Promise of growth, renewal, possibilities. "I've been thinking," Elena said. "Dangerous habit." "I'm serious. About next winter. About what happens if I get sick again, or if you do, or if we have trouble we can't handle alone." Taza turned to look at her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe we shouldn't be completely isolated. Maybe we need connections. People who'd check on us, help if things go bad. People don't like us much, in case you forgot." "I know. But there's a difference between seeking approval and building survival networks." She pulled her coat tighter. "There's a settlement 2 days north, mostly Apache families who've made peace with the territory. I was thinking we could visit, make contact, let them know we're here. You want to integrate. I want to survive. And surviving long-term means not being completely alone." Taza was quiet for a long time. "You know what they'll think. About us." "Let them think what they want. We know what we are." "Do we?" Elena looked at him, at this man who'd bought her freedom, taught her to survive, nursed her through sickness, and somewhere along the way become the most important person in her life. "Yeah, I think we do." He held her gaze and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or recognition of a truth they'd been dancing around for months. "All right," he said finally, "when the snow clears completely, we'll go. Make contact, see what happens." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Could go badly. Could go well too." You're an optimist. Someone has to be. He laughed, and the sound carried across the empty desert like a promise. Winter was ending. They'd survived it together, the storms, the hunger, the illness, the isolation. They'd come through it stronger, clearer, more certain of what they wanted. Whatever came next, they'd face it the same way they'd faced everything else. Together. The word had stopped feeling strange. It had become simple fact, as fundamental as breathing. They were together. In survival, in struggle, in the quiet moments between storms when life felt almost peaceful. And if that togetherness was starting to mean something more than partnership, well, they had time to figure out what that meant. They had time for everything now. Spring arrived slowly, reluctantly, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. The snow retreated inch by stubborn inch, revealing dead grass and frozen ground that would take weeks to thaw. But the sun climbed higher each day, and the wind lost some of its teeth, and Elena watched the land transform with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. They made the journey north in early April, when the roads were finally passable. Taza had been quiet all morning, checking and rechecking their supplies, his tension visible in the set of his shoulders. "You don't have to come if you don't want to," Elena said as she saddled the horse. "I want to. I'm just—" He tightened a strap. "I haven't been around people in a long time, Apache or otherwise. We can turn back. No, you're right. We need this." He swung into the saddle, then pulled her up behind him. "Doesn't mean I have to like it." The settlement was smaller than Elena expected, maybe 20 families living in a mix of traditional dwellings and rough cabins. Children played in the warming sun while women worked at outdoor fires. Men repaired fences and tended horses. It looked almost peaceful. Almost. The moment they rode in, conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward them, toward Taza specifically. Elena felt him stiffen. An older woman approached, her face lined with years but her eyes sharp. She spoke in Apache, rapid and pointed. Taza responded in the same language, his tone respectful but firm. "What's she saying?" Elena whispered. "That I have nerve showing my face here after what happened." "What did happen?" "Later." The conversation continued, other people gathering around. Elena caught fragments, her own name, the word for white woman, questions that felt like accusations. Taza answered each one calmly, but she could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on both of them. Finally, an old man stepped forward. He looked ancient, weathered by time and hardship, but his presence commanded immediate respect. He studied them both for a long moment, then spoke. Taza translated quietly. "He says we're welcome to stay the night, eat with them, but he wants to hear our story, the truth of it. Then we tell the truth." They were given space near one of the fires. As the sun set and the settlement gathered for the evening meal, Elena and Taza sat with the elders while the old man, his name was Dakota, asked questions. He wanted to know how they met, how Elena came to be living with Taza, what their intentions were. Each question was careful, designed to uncover deception or coercion. Elena answered honestly. She told them about her father, the trading post, the choice Taza had given her. She didn't soften it or make it noble. She just laid out the facts and let them judge. When she finished, Dakota turned to Taza. "And you? Why did you take her?" "Because I couldn't watch another woman be sold and do nothing." Taza's voice was steady. "I thought I could give her something better than what she was leaving. Maybe I was wrong, but I tried." "You always were too soft," an older woman said, but there was no malice in it. "Even as a boy, always trying to save things. Didn't save my sister." Silence fell. Several people looked away. Dakota spoke again, and this time his voice was gentler. "What happened to Nalin was not your fault. You were a child. The men who took her, they paid for that crime." "Not enough," Taza said flatly. "No. Never enough." The old man's eyes were sad. "But you cannot spend your whole life trying to balance scales that were weighted wrong from the start. So what do I do instead? You live, you build, you choose something other than revenge and isolation." Dakota looked at Elena. "Perhaps you have already started." They ate with the settlement that night, sharing food and careful conversation. Some people were openly curious about Elena. Others were suspicious. Most were just trying to figure out what to make of this strange pairing. A young woman named Kaya sat beside Elena, watching her with frank interest. "You really chose to stay with him? No one forced you?" "I really chose." "Why? You could have gone anywhere, back to your own people." "My own people sold me. At least Taza gave me a choice about staying." Kaya was quiet for a moment. "The white men who come through here, they all think Apache women belong to them. Take what they want, leave us to pick up the pieces. But you chose one of us. That's strange." "I didn't choose him because he's Apache. I chose him because he's decent." "Decent is rare." Kaya smiled slightly. "Hold on to that." That night, they were given a place to sleep in one of the community structures. As they lay in the darkness, Elena could hear Taza's breathing, too steady to be natural. "You're not sleeping," she said. "Neither are you." "What did that woman mean? About you being soft?" Taza was quiet for a long time. "When I was young, I used to try to save injured animals. Birds with broken wings, rabbits caught by predators. My sister helped me. We'd make little shelters, try to nurse them back to health. Did it work?" "Sometimes. Usually they died anyway, but we kept trying." He shifted in the darkness. "After Nalin was taken, I stopped. Figured there was no point trying to save anything when the world just took what it wanted anyway. And then you met me. And then I met you." She heard the smile in his voice. "Old habits, I guess." "I'm not a broken bird, Taza." "I know. You're much more stubborn." She laughed quietly. "We should try to sleep. They'll want to talk more tomorrow." "Elena?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for coming here, for standing with me. Where else would I be?" They spent 3 days in the settlement, long enough to establish connections, to show that they weren't a threat or a scandal waiting to explode. Long enough for Elena to feel the weight of acceptance. Tentative, conditional, but real. On the last night, Dakota called them to his fire. "You are welcome to return," he said through Taza's translation. "Both of you. If you need help, if winter becomes too hard, you have family here." "Family," Taza repeated, testing the word. "Did you think you were the only one left? That isolation was your only choice?" The old man shook his head. "We survive together, or we don't survive at all. That has always been true." They rode back to the homestead in thoughtful silence. Elena felt something loosening in her chest, a knot she hadn't known she was carrying. They weren't alone. They had people now. Options. "That wasn't as bad as I expected," Taza admitted as their land came into view. "Were you expecting it to be terrible?" "I was expecting them to run us out with guns." "That's dark, but honest." He helped her down from the horse. "I'm glad I was wrong." "Me too." The weeks that followed brought a shift in the rhythm of their lives. The land woke up, demanding attention, planting, tending, nurturing. Elena worked beside Taza, her hands deep in soil, learning which plants would thrive in this harsh climate and which would give up before they started. They talked while they worked. Real conversations, not just practical exchanges. Taza told her about his childhood, the years before everything fell apart. Elena shared memories of her mother, the dreams she'd had before survival became the only goal that mattered. One afternoon, as they took a break from planting, Elena wiped sweat from her face and looked at the progress they'd made. Neat rows of potential, seeds waiting to become food. "We're building something here." "We are." "Does that scare you?" Taza considered. "Less than it used to. You?" "Sometimes. When I think about how far I've come from who I was supposed to be." She pulled off her gloves. "My father wanted me to be some farmer's wife. Quiet, obedient, forgettable. Instead, I'm here, covered in dirt, learning to shoot and hunt and survive in the middle of nowhere." "Regret it?" "Not even a little." He smiled. "Good. Because you're terrible at being obedient." Says the man who lives by his own rules. "Exactly. We match." The word hung between them. Match. Like they fit together, like this arrangement had become something more than convenience or necessity. Elena stood, brushing dirt from her pants. I'm going to check the water level in the cistern. I'll finish here. She walked toward the cistern, but her mind wasn't on water levels. It was on the way Taza had said, "We match," like it was simple fact. On the way her heart had stuttered when he smiled. On the slow realization that somewhere in the months of survival and shared space, her feelings had shifted into territory she wasn't sure how to navigate. That night, she lay awake, listening to the familiar sounds of Taza preparing for bed. The walls between their rooms felt thinner than they used to, or maybe she was just more aware of them. She wanted to knock on his door, wanted to ask what they were to each other, whether he felt this shift too, whether the careful distance they maintained was protection or cowardice. But she didn't, because some questions changed everything, and she wasn't ready for everything to change. Not yet. In May, riders came again. Elena was in the garden when she heard them. Her first instinct was to run for the house, for the rifle, for Taza. But something made her pause. These riders moved differently, slower, more cautious, not aggressive. Taza emerged from the shed, rifle ready but not raised. Elena joined him, and together they watched 3 riders approach. The lead rider was a woman, middle-aged, dressed practically, with the bearing of someone who'd earned respect through competence rather than force. She pulled up 20 feet away and raised her hands, showing them empty. "We're not here for trouble," she called out. "Just conversation." "About what?" Taza responded. "About the fact that you two have become something of a legend, and we want to hear the real story." They invited the riders to dismount, to sit by the fire, to share coffee and conversation. The woman introduced herself as Margaret Chen, a journalist traveling through the territory documenting the changing frontier. "Your story has spread," she said, accepting the coffee Elena offered. "White woman choosing to live with Apache warrior. Some say it's scandal, some say it's kidnapping. I want to know what you say." Elena and Taza exchanged glances. Then, together, they told her. Everything. The trading post, the choice, the months of learning to survive, the confrontations, the winter. They held nothing back. Margaret took notes, asking clarifying questions, clearly trying to separate truth from rumor. "And you're happy here?" she asked Elena. "Truly?" "Happy is complicated, but free? Absolutely." "And you?" Margaret turned to Taza. "What do you get from this arrangement?" "Someone who sees me as human instead of savage. That's worth more than most people understand." Margaret nodded slowly. "I'm going to write about this. About you both. It'll be published in newspapers back east. People will have opinions." "Let them," Elena said. "Their opinions don't change my reality." "And your reality is?" Elena looked at Taza, at this man who'd given her everything by refusing to take anything. "My reality is that I'm exactly where I choose to be." After Margaret left, promising to send them a copy of her article when it was published, Elena felt something settle in her chest. Let the world know. Let them judge. She'd stopped living for other people's approval. "That was brave," Taza said, watching the riders disappear. "Or stupid. Maybe both." He turned to her. "But I'm glad you did it. Told the truth like that. Someone should know what actually happened instead of just the rumors. The truth won't stop the rumors. No, but it might help someone else who's trapped. Show them there are other options." Taza nodded. "My sister would have liked you." The words hit Elena harder than expected. "Yeah? Yeah. She was brave too, in quiet ways, the kind of brave that matters." He looked toward the horizon. "She'd be glad I'm not alone anymore. I'm glad you're not alone too." That night, after dinner, after the dishes were washed and the fire was banked, Taza stopped Elena before she could retreat to her room. "Can we talk?" he asked. Her heart jumped. "Of course." They sat by the dying fire, the space between them feeling simultaneously infinite and too small. "I've been thinking," Taza started, then stopped. Tried again. "About us. What we are. What we're becoming. And what are we becoming? I don't know. That's the problem." He looked at his hands. "When you first got here, I told myself I was just giving you space to recover. Then it became about surviving winter, then about making connections with the settlement. But all of it, everything we've built, It's not just practical anymore. Elena's throat tightened. No, it's not. I care about you. The words came out rough, like they'd been dragged from somewhere deep. More than I should, more than I meant to, and I don't know what to do with that. Why do you have to do anything with it? Because I'm scared of ruining what we have, of pushing for more and losing everything. Elena moved closer, closing some of the distance between them. What if I want more too? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw hope and fear warring in his expression. Do you? Yes. The word came out as a whisper. I've wanted more for months. I just didn't know how to say it. Elena, I love you. She said it before she could stop herself, before fear could steal the words back. I don't know when it happened or how, but I do. I love you. Taza stared at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't understand. Then, slowly, carefully, he reached out and cupped her face in his scarred hands. I love you too, he said. I think I have since the day you stood up to those men. Since you chose to stay, since you... He shook his head. Since you became essential. Lena leaned into his touch. So what do we do now? Whatever we want. We make the rules, remember? Then I want this. She closed the last of the distance between them. I want you. I want us. He kissed her then, gentle at first, then deeper, like he was discovering something he'd been missing his whole life. Elena kissed him back, pouring months of want and need and carefully guarded feelings into it. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Taza rested his forehead against hers. This changes everything, he said. Good. Everything needed changing. They sat by the fire until it burned down to embers, talking about what came next. Not just survival or practicality, but actual future. Dreams they'd both thought were dead started to feel possible again. They decided to formalize their partnership in the spring, not a traditional marriage since neither belonged to a world that would recognize it, but their own ceremony. Something witnessed by the settlement, making official what had already become true in every way that mattered. They talked about expanding the homestead, maybe taking in others who needed refuge like Elena had, about teaching, sharing what they'd learned, about building something that would outlast them both. And that night, when they finally went to bed, Elena didn't go to her room. She went to Taza's, and he held her like she was something precious and hard-won, and they slept tangled together like they'd been doing it for years. The next months blurred into a different kind of rhythm. Still hard work, still survival, but now laced with something warmer. Taza would catch Elena's eye across the garden and smile. She'd lean against him while they watched the sunset. They touched more, casual brushes of hands, her fingers in his hair, his arm around her shoulders. They learned each other in new ways. The sound of his laugh when she made terrible jokes, the way she sang while she cooked, off-key but enthusiastic, how they fit together in the dark, how their scars lined up like a map of everything they'd survived. In August, Margaret's article was published. A copy found its way to them through the settlement, someone who'd picked it up in town. Elena read it aloud while Taza listened, his expression unreadable. The article was fair, honest. It told their story without judgment or embellishment, presenting them as what they were, two people who'd found each other in impossible circumstances and built something real. She made us sound almost normal, Elena said when she finished. We are normal, just in a way most people don't understand. Do you think it'll help? Like I hoped? Maybe. Or maybe it'll just make us more of a curiosity. He shrugged. Either way, it's our truth. That counts for something. In September, they held their ceremony. It was simple. Just them, the settlement elders, and Kaya, who'd become something like a friend to Elena. They stood in front of Dakota as the sun set over the red hills, and they made promises. Not about obedience or ownership, but about partnership. About choosing each other every day. About building a life together on their own terms. Dakota blessed them in Apache, his words carrying weight, even though Elena only understood half of them. When it was done, they were officially bound, not by law or tradition, but by choice. That night, the settlement celebrated with food and music. Elena danced with Taza, both of them awkward and laughing, neither caring about grace or form, just being together, being happy. "This is it," Elena said as they took a break, both breathing hard. "This is what I was supposed to find." "What?" "Home. Not a place, but a person. You." Taza pulled her close. "Same. You're my home, Elena. The only one I've had in years." They stayed at the settlement for 3 days, then rode back to their homestead. Their land. Their life. As they crested the final hill and saw the small adobe house nestled in the red rocks, Elena felt something settle deep in her bones. This was it. This was enough. More than enough. They'd built this together, from nothing, from trauma, from desperate choices, and careful hope. They'd survived winter and illness and judgment and their own fears, and they'd come through it stronger. The years that followed weren't easy. The frontier never was. But they faced everything together: droughts that tested their resources, occasional visitors who brought trouble, the slow change of the territory around them as more settlers arrived. They expanded the homestead, taking in a handful of others over the years: women who needed refuge, men who'd been cast out, people who didn't fit anywhere else. They built a small community of misfits and survivors, all learning to exist on their own terms. Elena taught some of them to read and write, fulfilling that old dream of being a teacher. Taza taught survival skills, passing on the knowledge that had kept him alive. Together, they created something that defied easy categorization. Not quite a settlement, not quite a refuge, just a place where people could exist without having to explain themselves. Kaya visited often, sometimes staying for weeks. She and Elena would sit by the fire at night, talking about the changing world, about the cost of choosing yourself over societal expectations, about the small victories that added up to a life worth living. "Do you ever regret it?" Kaya asked one night. "Giving up your old life?" Elena looked around at the homestead she'd helped build, at Taza sleeping peacefully for once, at the life she'd carved from hardship. "Not for a second. That old life was killing me slowly. This one lets me breathe. Even though it's hard? Especially because it's hard. Hard work that matters is better than easy suffering any day." The world beyond their land continued to change. The Apache Wars ended. The territory became a state. New laws were written, old ones challenged. Margaret wrote more articles about them over the years, documenting their experiment in living differently. Some people praised them. Most criticized. A few tried to shut them down, claiming they were corrupting morals or harboring criminals. Each time, Elena and Taza stood their ground, backed by the settlement and their own fierce determination. They grew older. Taza's hair went fully silver. Elena's hands grew more gnarled from work. They both collected new scars, new stories, new reasons to be grateful they'd survived. And through it all, they chose each other. Every morning, every hardship, every moment of doubt. They chose partnership over isolation, hope over bitterness, love over fear. 10 years after they met, Elena stood in the same spot where she'd first arrived, sold by her father, terrified of what came next. Now she owned this land, owned her life, owned her choices. Taza came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" "How far we've come. How impossible this seemed back then." "Still seems impossible sometimes. But we did it anyway. We did." He kissed her temple. "And we'll keep doing it, for as long as we have." "That's the plan." They stood there together as the sun set over the desert, painting their world in shades of gold and red. The land was still harsh, life was still hard, but it was theirs, built on their terms, shaped by their choices. Elena had been sold like property and had reclaimed her humanity. Taza had been haunted by ghosts and had found peace with the living. Together, they'd proven that freedom wasn't something granted by others. It was something you took, defended, and built your life around. The story of the woman sold to the Apache warrior became legend. Some versions were scandalized, some were romanticized. Few got it exactly right. But the truth was simpler than legend. It was the truth of two broken people who'd found each other and decided brokenness didn't mean worthless. It was the truth of choosing to survive and then choosing to thrive. It was the truth that home wasn't a place you were born into, but something you built with your own scarred hands. And in the end, that truth was enough. More than enough. It was everything.